Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video, as always, finds you well and in good spirits wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much, as always, for your time. I know it is precious. I know it is important to you, especially during these times. And with that, as always, please continue to stay strong and take very good care of yourselves and your loved ones during these times. I'd like to carry on, if I may, with the question and answer, the Q&A videos. By my count, we are now at Q&A part 7. Alright, so our first question is from our dear friend Roger Mars, or a number of questions, so thank you very much, my dear friend. First is, what line of work are you in? Okay, so I think I've mentioned this already in a past video, so I'll just direct you to one of the past videos where I talk about what I do and my job, my current job. But thank you very much for the question. And have you ever paid a crazy amount of money for a rare criterion? Let's see. So I have been pretty fortunate in this area. I don't think I've gotten, let's see, in terms of Japan, for example, I was able to find, let's say, in the wild at a really good price, around maybe, oh gosh, $25-30 US, considering the exchange rate at the time. I was able to find, for instance, in the wild, a very good copy of the Blu-ray of The Man Who Fell to Earth, and it was in the Digipack, and I had already gotten that, but I thought, oh gosh, this is quite a thing, and so I got that. I also found other quite rare Blu-rays in the wild here in Tokyo and on auction sites. And I know friends of mine also who live in Tokyo who found some really great things in the wild as well. I know a friend of mine who found Chungking Express, the Blu-ray, in the wild here in Tokyo for a very low price, around the same price, I think $20 or so. So you can find deals here and there and everywhere if one is lucky enough, I suppose. But yes, I have paid, not for a lot of things, but for a few things I've paid quite a bit of money for something, not completely overboard perhaps, but just some things that I felt at the time were very rare and worth acquiring. However, I should say that now, as I have a family, and as my family is growing, not necessarily in terms of number anymore, but let's say in terms of my kids growing up, that's what I mean, then I should say that now I am not as active in the sort of hunt for rare OOP items, criterion or otherwise, than I was, let's say, several years back. And, when let's say before my children were born, for example. And so I am not so active in that anymore. Maybe once in a while, if something does come up, I'll think about it. But again, it really depends on my budget at the time, etc., and the like. But now, not so much. But maybe when I was a little bit younger, maybe when my sort of family responsibilities were of a certain extent that I still had a pretty okay consumable portion of my income, let's put it that way, in terms of a monthly budget, then that was something I considered much more. But now I'm much more, how should I say, I'm spending more, or not spending, but I'm putting more of our money into our collective savings, and so just to take into account our kids and family budget and things of that nature. So less less sort of money on my part is being focused in on these sort of rare physical media items. And also I should say that I'm finding also that the items that I am looking at in particular have tended over time to have received pretty good, if not great, releases, either from Criterion or otherwise. And so that's a tricky thing about OOP items and rarity and how much to spend, because you never know when something might reemerge into the market. It's pretty much a guessing game. And when you're dealing with spending money, of course, one has to remember what one's means are, and also if one is, let's say, spending to the extent that maybe we're getting really close to the extent of our budget, then if something eventually were to reemerge out of the OOP wilderness, that could become a pretty almost shocking thing indeed. I understand that feeling, and so it's a bit of a difficult game to play sometimes. And so even with that in mind, I'm now perhaps even more cautious than ever. Also, I have to say that in terms of OOP items and the Criterion collection, I'm pretty much set. And so there might be a couple things here and there. I'm always keeping my eye on, for instance, on VHS items and things like that. But that's just almost a side thing more than anything else, and I'm sort of casually on the hunt for that. But in terms of other items, I was very fortunate to have been able to collect all the items, not collect, but to have been able to acquire all the items that ended up becoming OOP over time. And so I was very fortunate about that. But anyway, Roger, thank you very much for your questions, and I hope you are well, my friend. Next is from Luke Siyufy. Excuse me if I got the pronunciation incorrect. I apologize. But Luke, you asked, do you have a letterboxd account? And if so, what is it? I do. And I think I mentioned it to you, and there might have been some other comments from other viewers. So I do have an account. It is active, but I don't use it as much. And again, that's for no reason other than I am not necessarily used to the idea of using letterboxd in a very proactive way. So that's just on me. I have nothing against letterboxd. I have nothing against people who use it. And so I'm very flattered if people are looking in as to what my letterboxd account is. And I think I haven't been active on it for some time. Again, it's just my own personal way of encountering cinema, engaging with cinema. And so I tried it a little bit, and I'll keep trying as much as I can going forward. But again, my personal way of engaging with cinema is I watch something, I might write it down. I actually have a little diary that I write some notes in. It's pretty. It can be pretty extensive sometimes, or it can be just a 1 or 2 line thing. Others, but I'll tend to write something down in terms of not necessarily cataloging, but just trying to jot down some notes that I had. But all in all, I was never used to the letterboxd platform, and again, I'm trying to, but again, it's a little bit difficult for me to get used to it, and that's just on me. I've only been, for instance, I only started, for example, Facebook. I only started Facebook around 2.5 years ago. And the same is true for Instagram. I didn't start Instagram until very recently. I didn't start this YouTube channel in earnest until about 2.5 years ago, perhaps. And so I'm still very, very new to the active social networking, SNS and everything like that. And that includes letterboxd. And so while I did start an account based off of the recommendations of many friends of mine, and I tried to be active in it, at the moment I am not so active. I will of course try, because I know how important it is for a lot of the people in the community that we find ourselves in. I understand that, and I have tried a little bit. I think some of the information might be a little bit outdated, and so I might have to refresh it quite considerably if I were to maintain active status on it. But it is an active account. It is there. However, please note that just due to my own personal quirks or my own way of engaging with cinema, I don't necessarily maintain as active a presence on letterboxd as, say, other people do. I mean, other people use letterboxd with great enthusiasm and really quite skillfully, much more skillfully than I could ever hope to achieve. So I applaud those people for being able to do that. But maybe one of these days I will try to get into it more. But at the moment, again, I hope everyone understands. I do have the account, so if you want to check it out, please do. I'll try to keep posting as much as I can, but again, it is a little bit, I admit that it's something that I am not necessarily used to. Again, that's my own personal film journey, but I do have the account in case you're interested, and I'll leave the details below. Thank you very much for your interest. Let's see, next is, our dear friend, Damn Fool Idealistic Crusader. So, hello, my dear friend, and you have a number of questions here, so let's see if we can try to answer them. Number one, what is your viewing setup for different formats? Okay, so I think I might have answered this in a previous video, so you can check that out. But again, thank you very much for the great question, my dear friend. And next is, how do you go about storage and display for your collection? That's a very good question. So, I am more concerned with storage rather than display, and that is purely for practical reasons. I am very limited in terms of the available space that I have here in this Tokyo apartment. It is, I would say, for a Tokyo apartment in this particular part of Tokyo, and given the location, it is a pretty okay sized apartment for a family of 4. But that being said, it is certainly not as big as, say, maybe one's, if I could have a house at a similar price level, say in somewhere comparable, let's say in the United States, for example, and so, in terms of the house size, the number of rooms, etc. And you know, this is also based off of my own experience living in the United States. And so, in general, of course, property area, especially in Tokyo, is considerably less. And so we have to be very careful and very thoughtful in how we use the space. And that means, unfortunately, that I can't have shelves and shelves for all the Blu-rays that I have. And so what we've done is I've put all the shelves in one sort of very small walk-in closet, and we've adapted that closet into a Criterion closet, for example. And so that's one way that we are trying to conserve space. Also, there's a concern about earthquakes here, and if you have earthquakes, thank goodness we haven't had an earthquake here, at least in recent memory, where it's been so strong to have actually shaken shelves off of their foundation and actually thrown them off to the side. There have been strong earthquakes like that in the past, don't get me wrong, but at least in Tokyo here, even when the big earthquake hit in March 2011, that was in the northern part of Japan, here in Tokyo there wasn't that big of an aftershock as there was in the northern part. And believe me, the northern part was really severely hit. It's actually my wife's hometown, and I lived there for a number of years. That was one of the places that was severely hit in that 2011 earthquake and tsunami. But at that time, I remember we felt really big shocks at the time, but it wasn't as strong. In other words, we didn't have any shelves at my house, for example, that were knocked over off of their foundations. But that being said, there is the fear that one day a strong earthquake could hit. We can't predict these things, and so that always makes me a little bit nervous, having shelves in the open space of a room. For instance, heaven forbid, if, let's say, one of my kids was in the room at the time an earthquake actually hit, and it was, how should I put it, something happened, again, I don't even want to think about it. And so what we've done is we've had all the shelves in the closet, so fortunately we don't have to, our fears are somewhat diminished by that. Also, some shelves that we have here, for instance the Laserdiscs, we've had them fastened to the wall, and so that is one extra source of enforcement, and we're trying to keep them as low to the ground as possible, etc. So these shelves here, for example, are the IKEA shelves that I think are quite useful for Laserdisc storage, I think, as you might know, and they don't go so high, and so I think this is about the highest that we're willing to go as far as having shelves in open spaces. And so, yes, so there's that. So I'm more concerned with storage rather than display. In fact, I'm not even concerned about display because unfortunately, that is the practical concerns as far as the space that I have outweigh any hopes that I might have in terms of an ideal display. Now, is this true for all collectors here in Tokyo? Certainly not. Everyone is operating in his or her own way, of course, and so I think even some people who are very, very strong cinema fans who have a very extensive collection find ways to display it with great enthusiasm and taking safety concerns into consideration, etc., etc. And so this is just my own way. And yes, there's that. And also I should say that I do have boxes or plastic cases about this big, and I have a number of them, and I do keep old DVDs and Blu-rays that I don't necessarily refer to as much, but I still keep them. It might be one day that I might sell them off, I'm not sure, but until then they are kept away, and so they are very easy to store under a bed or against the wall or something like that, so out of the way. But I do have that. So my point is that I do have shelves, but I did have a video where I made a kind of Criterion. The shelves for the Criterion collection were basically in this closet that we set aside in this room. In fact, it's right over there off camera. But yeah, it's less for display and more for storage. Again, I wish it were both, but it has to be more for storage and less for display. And let's see, next is, do you buy many Laserdiscs? I've seen some LD fans go to Japan and have a field day picking up rare discs for nothing. Yes, so at the moment, my Laserdisc purchasing activities are pretty much close to nil, if not nil. And this is because I'm pretty much okay with the size and the content of my Laserdisc collection, which is comprising almost entirely of Criterion releases and Voyager Company releases. Now, I have to make certain choices in terms of the limitations I have to impose upon myself in terms of collecting, and for better or for worse, I have to therefore put limitations on Laserdisc collecting. And that means that because of the space limitations that I mentioned earlier, I have to basically put a limit. And so I on purpose put a limit on my Laserdisc purchases and my Laserdisc collection to more or less the Criterion collection and the Voyager Company collection, and any other maybe ancillary or related or somewhat related titles I'll keep into consideration, but more or less I've had to keep it limited to that. And even way back when I was, let's say, more active in online Laserdisc fan communities like Facebook communities, etc., even back then I was still very much limited by those parameters. And again, that's just for practical reasons. That's also for, I need to maintain limitations. I don't have endless amounts of money, and so I can't keep spending and spending. Now, to mention this point about Japan, yes, Japan still does have, I would say, a fairly healthy used Laserdisc market, although it has considerably dwindled over the past several years. In other words, I could say that it was much more vibrant in terms of the amount of boxes and shelves that one could find in used Laserdisc and media stores here in Tokyo. Those selections have, over the years, dwindled. They used to be in their own sections. Now that's just in a little corner, or they're together with the vinyl or something like that. And so I've seen this dwindle over time. And so the selections have diminished somewhat. Again, this could really depend. I'm not the most savvy when it comes to knowing exactly where to go for Laserdisc purchases here in Japan. I do know a number of collectors who, yes, as you say, come to Japan and really find a lot of great things in the wild. They go to different stores. It becomes like a little adventure, going from place to day trips outside of Tokyo to some stores, etc. And that is true also for hardware as well as as well as the Laserdiscs themselves. I would say that it is still possible to find really good Laserdisc hardware here for really good prices in pretty good condition, and also you can find parts as well for very, very cheap. And so that's one thing that is still pretty much, I would say, a healthy market in terms of the hardware. Although again, I'm not quite sure how long that will last, and especially now with this current crisis, it's not clear to me how this current crisis will affect these used markets. It could be a significant effect, I'm not sure. And I should also say that there is a pretty healthy, or there continues to be a pretty healthy presence of online Laserdisc sellers, both Laserdiscs and also hardware, through, for instance, Japanese auction sites, etc. Those auction sites usually require Japanese addresses, and so usually that means that people from overseas wouldn't be able to do it, so they might have to order by a proxy or through a representative here in Japan or something like that. But that is also possible, and while I'm not as active as I used to be, once in a while when I will check, I do notice that that online presence is still pretty healthy, so that's something to keep in mind. But anyway, let's see here. Next, number 4 is, I'm curious how you manage to import so much in terms of releases. Is it very difficult to import any labels to Japan? I find it hard enough to afford stuff here, so I can't imagine adding on extra costs. Yes, so this really depends on the seller. And usually my experience is that if I'm able to order directly from the label, then shipping usually tends to be, relatively speaking, lower than, let's say, ordering through third-party sellers. An example is Eureka Masters of Cinema. Also, Arrow, I would say, to Japan has fairly decent or reasonable shipping prices, I suppose, especially considering that most of the time the Arrow box sets tend to be pretty heavy, and so shipping prices tend to depend on the weight and the size and the weight of the particular article. The one place that I still continue to find to be most difficult, of course, is the Criterion Collection, because the Criterion Collection does not ship to Japan, and so therefore I have to rely on third-party sellers for that. And up to recently, I've relied primarily on Amazon.com, Amazon US, for my purchases of Criterion Collection releases. However, now with this current crisis, I am unable to make purchases through Amazon, and so I have had to find other means to try to make purchases of the most recent releases of Criterion. And one of the things that I've been affected by is, unfortunately, there's the Bruce Lee box set. And if this current crisis hadn't occurred, I think ordinarily I would have placed my pre-order by now of that particular box set through Amazon US. However, now, although pre-orders are available through Criterion and Amazon US, I am unable to make pre-orders of that particular item through either such site, as I say, because Criterion doesn't ship to Japan, so therefore pre-ordering through the Criterion set is impossible for me because of my Japanese address. And also now Amazon is unable to make shipments of certain items to Japan, and that means the Bruce Lee set. So I'm unable, at the moment anyway, to make a pre-order of the Bruce Lee Criterion set. And I'm particularly keen on making a pre-order of that because I have a suspicion that that set might get to be very popular. If you recall, the Ingmar Bergman cinema set had been very, very popular upon its initial release, such that they were sold out. And so for a couple months there at least, you couldn't get a copy. I fortunately was able, that was an instance at the time where Amazon US allowed me to make a pre-order of the Bergman box set. And so I was able to get my copy shipped to me here through Amazon US. But now with the Bruce Lee box set, I'm not sure. So I'm going to have to find another way to order that. I'll find a way somehow. But as far as shipping is concerned, I found that Amazon US gave me the best, most reasonable shipping costs. Also recently, up to a few years ago, Barnes & Noble gave me some really good shipping because at the time they were able to ship to Tokyo. Now I'm not sure if they're able to ship to Tokyo at all. I also experienced some issues, and not just in terms of being able to ship to Tokyo, but also the length of time it took for orders to come in. through Amazon, I was always lucky because I could expect maybe a week, 10 days, maybe 2 weeks for an order to come in. So that would be okay for me. But for Barnes & Noble, sometimes I had to wait almost 2 months or sometimes even longer. And so that wasn't necessarily a situation I really find myself comfortable being. And so I've tended to shy away from Barnes & Noble online sales, although I do think that they're very, very valuable, of course. But just in terms of shipping, it's a little bit of an unclear situation as far as my own personal experience has been up to now. I should also say finally that with respect to this, shipping is the only way that I'm able to get a Criterion purchase. Now, there are, let's say, specialty import stores here in Japan that do maybe have like a used market, and so it is possible, I suppose, to find Criterions being sold in like actual copies of something, but and used and everything like that. But I should say that they're very expensive, and so it's actually overall a lot cheaper for me to order through Amazon US. And Amazon US has, as I say, up to now been very reasonable in terms of shipping and being able to ship to Tokyo. But there always has been the issue of damage, of ordinary wear and tear in the shipment process. And so, there might be little hairline cracks in the Scanovo case, for instance. There might be some folds in the booklet. There might be some dents or some creases found in digipacks and that sort of thing. And so I have, unless an item has been really, really, really damaged beyond repair, I usually tend to accept those, and I'm always okay with those. In other words, I don't mind it if there are frayed corners of a digipack, for instance, or there is a little bit of a maybe a slightly noticeable and yet still a minor tear or a crack or something like that. I don't mind those at all. I did receive one where the disc was scratched beyond repair, and so I did have to return that. I also received a disc that was that the data itself seemed to be fundamentally defective, because at a certain chapter it would stop playing, and so I think that was a defect inherent in the disc itself. So I did have to return those, but that was a very rare instance. And so this has actually been, I think, a pretty good thing, because it has allowed me, therefore, to be okay with not necessarily having a product need to be in perfect mint condition every time I experience it or I handle it. And so not to say that I throw it around all the time, but my point is that it allows me, therefore, more access, and I feel comfortable being able to hold it and to read it and to look through it. And my kids sometimes with films that I think are age appropriate tend to look through the booklet or look at the pictures, etc. So I don't mind that, and I think actually it's helped me out. It helped me to be okay with ordinary wear and tear of ordinary handling of the product. And so I think that has a lot to do with the fact that I've had to get used to that from the shipping issues that I receive here in Tokyo. So in other words, I can't necessarily go to a store and pick out the most pristine looking one and then purchase that and keep it as pristine as possible on my shelf. It's impossible for me to do that. So, but as long as the disc is fine, as long as the overall package is okay, then that's good enough for me. But at the same time, I am I'm in much admiration of those collectors out there who have such pristine copies of all of their releases. I'm so impressed with that. And number 5, let's see. Is your channel a kind of outlet for film discussion that you don't get to do in everyday life? I know mine is, but have always been curious about other channels. Yes, the answer to the question is yes. So I don't necessarily talk about films to this extent every day, and so I've had a number of friends, even now, who are film fans, but I don't talk to them every day. I'd like to, but I don't do that. I do have a friend who is also, he and I graduated from the same university, from the same year, in fact, and he also lives in Tokyo. He's a very, very dear friend of mine, and every time we meet, we always talk for hours and hours and hours about film. We usually go to a film together and then we have a drink and a meal afterwards, and we'll just talk and talk and talk about everything, including cinema. And so that's the sort of conversation that I have with him. But I can't have that conversation with him every day, of course, because I don't meet him every day. So this YouTube channel is also, as I think I might have mentioned this before, but it also serves to be a kind of outlet for me to be able to try to work out in real time my own cinematic journey issues and concerns and things of that nature. So yes, I think it is an outlet for me, very much so, in terms of film discussion. But anyway, my dear friend, thank you so much for the great questions. I really appreciate it. And keep up the great work, my friend, on your channel. It's one of the best. It is really one of the best channels. Let's see. Next is Stereo Chrome Studios. Hi there, Daisuke. After your recent video regarding music and film, I've been thinking a lot about the 1982 film adaptation of Pink Floyd's album The Wall and the concept of using music as the basis for a film. So I suppose my question to you is this: have you ever listened to an album or any piece of music that you think could be adapted into a film? Alternatively, have you ever listened to a piece of music that stuck out to you as being suitable for use in a film's soundtrack? Oh, that's a really good question. I might have mentioned an album, maybe King Crimson, in the Court of the Crimson King, for instance, the first one. Also, I love Yes. I love prog rock, as I might have mentioned before. So Yes, Close to the Edge, I think would be a really great one. And I do know a lot of people, myself included, who are fans of the Beatles. And so one of my favorite Beatles albums is, I love the White Album very much, very, very much. But the one that really got to me was Revolver, and I really loved that album. I think one of my favorite songs, the one that I really clicked, I just watched over, or not watched, but I listened over and over and over and over again as a kid, was I'm Only Sleeping. I was so fascinated by that song, and so I always thought that would be, I can always imagine a kind of swirl of a world that could be conjured up if that song were ever to be adapted into a film or something of that nature. And so, of course, we've seen Beatles films, and we've seen even the Beatles themselves try to deal with their own music in terms of like something like Magical Mystery Tour, which is also a very interesting thing, especially the thing with the spaghetti, what was I saying? So yeah, those are some examples. There are many, many more examples I could try to think up of, but those are some that come to mind immediately. And you said, have you ever listened to a piece of music that stuck out to you as being suitable for use in a film's soundtrack? I have, and let's see. I suppose I've listened to a lot of I guess you could call them Japanese folk music, or sort of older popular songs that I think would have a lot of appeal, crossover appeal as well, for use in cinema. And also in terms of, I just mentioned I'm Only Sleeping. I think that would be an interesting turn for a film, etc., etc. So yes, I have thought about this, but I think there's so many to choose from. But yeah. So anyway, my dear friend, Stereo Chrome Studios. So thank you very much for your question, and I hope you're well. Let's see. Hello, Daisuke. Do you have a favorite James Dean film? Oh yes, Rebel Without a Cause. That is one that was one of the films I also grew up on as a kid, and there's something of and you say, would love to hear your thoughts on his acting and legacy. Just to be very brief, there's something of a on the one hand, it's one might call it a sort of raw energy that just reaches out to you from beyond the screen and into your hearts, but also there is a real tenderness and sensitivity, as well as an urgency that I think is very electric. And of course, the whole community and the whole world would have benefited greatly from a long and prosperous career from the one and only James Dean. But for what we have now, I think we have so much to treasure. Again, it was very short, but it was, again, it could have been something really, really great, and the world missed out, unfortunately, and very tragically, of course, as we all know, in terms of what he could have offered to all of us with a long and very prosperous career. But what we have now, I think, is really great. In particular for me, I think Rebel Without a Cause, but I think that's true for a lot of people. But great, thank you very much for your question, Marc Rug. I really appreciate it. Let's see. Next is Matt S. Hello, Daisuke. A question I've always wanted to ask you is, what are your favorite film scores? What scores do you love because of the music in its own right? And which scores do you think are the most effective to the narrative of the film? Lastly, what are your favorite song scores, excluding musicals? I hope you and your family are well and good spirits, my friend. Okay, so again, this is a very, very loaded question, a very deep question, an excellent question. And so I've mentioned music before, but I'll try to mention some others just as examples. I'm a huge, huge fan of the Akira anime, and the Geino Yamashiro Gumi soundtrack is one of the best. That is epic, absolutely epic, and I listen to that even now, very much so. It has a certain timelessness that is still now so effective, so cool, so emotional, and so creative and so clever. And so that's the Akira soundtrack, the Geino Yamashiro Gumi soundtrack. There's also the soundtrack for, I'm a big fan of the soundtracks for Star Trek, the original crew films, and in particular Star Trek II and Star Trek III. So Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. So James Horner. So James Horner, of course, has a very, very long and very illustrious career, of course. And one of the pieces of music, or the pieces of music, came from these Star Trek films, and those are really great. I don't want to go into too much detail, but there's one particular moment around the middle of the film of Star Trek III that is very, very exciting, suspenseful, and I think it has to do a lot with the music. Incidentally, while I'm on the topic of Star Trek III, I should say that, this whole thing that's gripping the world with this world crisis and everything, I don't know about you, but this is really something that I feel is something that I just want. I want everyone to get out of this well and safely and as healthily as possible, and I want this whole thing to be over, right? I mean, I'm sure you feel the same way as I do. I'm sure everyone wants this to be over and done with, behind us, so we can really get back to how we were before the world was struck by this, And so I'm, at that moment when this whole crisis is about, when we get to that moment, my friends, when this crisis will be over, and we can stare down this common foe straight in the eye, I'd like to, at that moment, think that I could borrow a line from James T. Kirk, as he said it in Star Trek III, and I can say it right to our common foe straight in the eye and say, "I have had enough of you." That's what I want to say once this whole crisis is behind us. So, yes. So Star Trek III, yes. And actually, speaking of that, also, I'm also a big fan of the Jerry Goldsmith scores to many of his films, but also in particular to the Omen. And there's a particular score, the main theme to the final conflict is also one that's really great. That's one that I think the day that this whole thing, this world thing, is behind us, the day that it is over, and I can go out and walk and feel and breathe in the air and soak in the sunshine and feel happy to know that everything is over. I'd like to think that I'll listen on my headphones to the main theme of the final conflict. It's the third part of the Omen film series, but it's called the final conflict. Sometimes it's called Omen 3, the final conflict, but it's called the final conflict. The main theme. We can walk out, breathe in the air, and listen to that really bombastic score, and just it's almost like a fist-pumping moment, and just think, yes, this is something that is conquerable or can be conquered. There's a certain sense of destiny in that particular score. So I'd like to think maybe I'll listen to that on that very special day when it comes, and it will come very soon, my friends. We will win this. And then also, as far as song scores are concerned, I suppose there are so many to choose from, but let's see, I do have a soft spot for where films use the song. For instance, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. The Platters, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. I'm a real big fan of that. Also, it's of course the Rolling Stones and Martin Scorsese, and in particular, of course, the iconic "Gimme Shelter" from Let It Bleed, and that use of it. We've seen it in a number of films, of course. I think used most effectively in Goodfellas and Casino. There are small moments there, but they're quite key moments in Goodfellas, and one key moment in Casino. Where it was used, and I think it was used very, very effectively. It was also used very interestingly in The Departed as well, but I think those two in particular are really, really cool. And also, I should say, Martin Scorsese's use of songs is very enlightening. Also, the use of songs, I would say also John Waters. John Waters' films and the use of songs is very striking and important. So anyway, thank you very much for the excellent question, my friend, and I hope you are well. Let's see. Next is our dear friend JT. So JT asks, how often do you get burned out from watching films? Do you ever take breaks from watching films? Do you feel obligated to watch films continuously now that you have an active YouTube channel? So I'll answer those questions in order. I think they're really great. How often do you get burned out from watching films? I might have mentioned this as a story in one video a year or so ago, but I'll mention it again, which is that there was a point in my life, maybe, 10, 15 years ago now, I'm not sure exactly when, where I was actually burnt out from cinema. And there was a period, therefore, where I didn't watch cinema at all, and I was actually feeling a little bit burnt out, and I'll tell you why. I think in my early years, where I was actively watching films, so my teenage years and maybe through to college, etc., or undergrad years, I was really loving cinema and I was adoring cinema. But now that I think back on it, I think what had happened to me in my own experience was that I was relying so much on cinema because I loved it so much, but I was relying on it during those years at the time when I was younger. I think I was relying on it too much, in the sense that I was probably trying to look for something in cinema because I felt like I wasn't necessarily getting something out of my own life experiences. I don't know if that makes any sense. In other words, maybe I was feeling at the time certain life experience disappointments or lack of satisfaction in whatever capacity that might have meant at the time when I was younger. What was I going to do with my life? Who was I? What was I all about? Why am I here? Those sorts of things. And I think there was a moment, especially when I was younger, when I was very confused. And so I think I found cinema to be a great solace. And I think cinema as solace and as comfort is very, very important. However, for me at the time, I think I relied on the cinema too much. You can rely on it, I think, to a certain degree and maintain a certain sense of, let's say, a strong sense of self. But for me at the time, I think I was overly reliant on cinema to try to give me some kind of answer or something. And cinema can do that, of course, and I acknowledge that. But for me, if it was almost like I was looking at it too much and I wasn't necessarily cultivating my own life experiences, if that makes any sense. And so I felt burnt out by cinema, because ultimately, if I think about cinema like that too much, then ultimately cinema will disappoint. It's inevitable. It will disappoint. And so it was something that I experienced in my mid-20s. I wouldn't necessarily call it a crisis, but I would call it a feeling of being burnt out. And so I think I took that opportunity to try different things and to do different activities in my life. I think around that time I discovered exercise, and I talked about exercise in an earlier Q&A. I also started to meet different people and try to get new experiences from there. And I ended up getting married, and then I later had a family, and I still do, and all this stuff. And so and then along the way, I went back into cinema, and I started to be able to, at least on my own terms, be able to get a better grasp of where cinema fell in my own life experience. And so I have a great love of cinema now. Of course, don't get me wrong, I really, really do love cinema. But I also have to acknowledge that for me personally, when I talk about a cinema journey, I also have to keep in mind that I feel like it is very important for me to get a sense of my own life and my own experiences. I find cinema is good to be as an escape, as a gateway, as a solace, but I also find cinema important as a reflection of life experiences and the human condition. And in that context, I think that having a good grasp as to one's own life experiences, I think, is very important. Now, I'm not the most experienced human being out here in the planet. Far from it. I have very limited experiences. I have very limited understandings of other aspects of the world, etc. I haven't traveled the world as much as many other people have. I have done my fair share of traveling, of course, but not to the extent that, let's say, other people do. And so my knowledge base and my experience base is very, very limited. And so in that sense, cinema does provide a gateway. And so I look at it that way. But I also have to keep in mind that I have to keep everything focused and anchored based on my own understanding and subjective viewpoint, and thus my experience. And so I try not to get overly dependent on cinema. I don't know if that makes sense, because I know, again, I can't speak for anyone else, but I can speak for me and my own past, in that I know that in the past maybe I tried to see cinema as something that will give me all the answers. And if I look at cinema like that, then I know that I will be disappointed, because I was in the past. And so I always have to keep in mind that it is a sort of guide, it is a friend, it is a teacher, it is also a mentor, it also shows us things that we don't like. But all that is always, for me, in the context of what I know in my own experience. And so now I'm trying to maintain, as, how should I put it, for me anyway, as grounded an approach as possible. But yes, back in the day, I did feel burnout, and quite a considerable period of burnout. But since then, I was able to readjust or recalibrate, and this is where I find myself now. And then you asked, do you ever take breaks from watching films? Oh, of course. It's very important for me, anyway, to take breaks. It's almost like taking a break from exercise or something like that, because you can only, at least from my own personal experience, I can only exercise my brain muscles so much before they reach a certain level of fatigue. So I have to give them a little bit of break sometimes. And so I tend to try to do other things and other activities completely isolated from cinema and the like. So I think that's very healthy, at least for me. I know others who can go on for just unending stretches and still maintain a high sense of vigor and activity, which I think is very, very admirable. I'm very jealous of people like that. And then, do you feel obligated to watch films continuously now that you have an active YouTube channel? No, actually, I'm very fortunate that way. So I don't get paid for anything through this YouTube channel like Patreon. The only kind of revenue stream through this YouTube channel is YouTube ads, or I don't know if they're called Google AdSense or something like that. I don't know the exact word, but it's an ad thing where if one reaches a certain set of criteria, then one can can qualify one's channel for ad revenue. And so based on the number of views that a video gets, then one's ad revenue for a particular video accumulates. And so therefore, and there are certain guidelines with respect to that, but that's the only sort of revenue that I receive from this particular YouTube channel. And which is to say that the ads, I have no idea what the ads are, and so I don't get any direct payment or anything from a viewer, and I don't get any direct payment or any kind of quirk or anything like that from any label. I don't get any what do you call it, screener or advanced copy of something or anything like that. I make all my purchases through my own pocketbook and also through my own spending, etc. And so all the stuff that I've shown up to now is basically just my own decision, based a lot of times, of course, on viewer input, but also just on my own intuition and my own headspace at the time, what I'm thinking about, what I'm concerned with at that particular point in time. And so there have been times in my YouTube existence where I haven't done a video, but there are other times where I try to be as active as possible, and that is simply because I feel like if I can get it out there, I'm able to work it out in real time on a video. Then I can somehow maybe come to terms with that particular film or work in my head or in my heart. And then once that's there, I can maybe move on to something else and go from there. So as I say, this YouTube channel is, I think, for me, very much my own trying to work out a lot of things. Of course, it's also an opportunity for me to meet a lot of people, don't get me wrong, but I find it's also my way of trying to work out things. And so I'm trying to work it out in my own way and at my own speed. And so I think that's generally that's what governs the amount of times I would tend to upload videos on this channel, or the rate at which I upload videos on this channel. So sometimes I'll have a lot of videos at once. Sometimes I just won't. I'll be very quiet. It just really depends on my mood. And so with that, I don't necessarily mind. I'm not necessarily obligated at all to watch a film and try to review it or something like that. I won't necessarily feel obligated like that. Sometimes maybe I won't necessarily feel obligated to watch something continuously. But for instance, I do feel I feel a little bit of, maybe not pressure is the right word, but I do feel like those videos where I respond to the criterion announcements, I feel like I have to get those out quickly, because those are videos that I think a lot of people, and I'm very grateful for this, a lot of people tend to ask me about, and so I feel I should just get that out there and try to get my initial responses, because those get a lot of attention, and also they are very timely in terms of when the announcement is had versus that initial sense of excitement in the air and discussion. So I'll try to upload a video about that as soon as the announcement is made. But apart from that, I won't necessarily feel any pressure to upload anything quickly or to try to watch something continuously. Again, that's one of the beauties of this thing. I'm not paid. I don't have a boss, and so I can basically conduct my schedule in a way that I feel is appropriate for me, and also something that hopefully viewers can latch on to. And it's also to say that how should I put it? Sometimes what I will want to talk about might coincide with a real trend. In other words, it might be something that might be very popular at the moment and might get a lot of views for a video. And other times, what I'm thinking about might get relatively little views. And so it really depends. And when I was maybe starting out, I heard a lot of like YouTube advice saying, I should try to think about the trends in order to raise the video views, etc. And I tried to take that to heart, but ultimately, for me anyway, and what I was trying to do, it really didn't work out, because I knew that I just have to trust my instinct, and just if this is what I think is worth talking about for me, then I just have to just talk about it, because again, as I've tried to mention before, this YouTube channel is, I would say, it's more about me trying to work out issues and concerns that I have about certain works of cinema. And so if people watch some of those videos a lot, then I'm very grateful. But even if there are maybe relatively small numbers of views, that is something that I'm still very, very grateful for. And as I say, I'm very fortunate in my own personal situation where I don't necessarily have to be concerned about raising revenue through this channel. I'm very fortunate that way, and so I know that I have a certain bit of leeway in terms of what I'm able to talk about, and based on that sense of freedom, I can try to develop what it is I'm trying to talk about, and thus I don't feel like I have to continuously watch things in order to be able to talk to them. Also, finally, let me say that if I were to feel the pressure of having to watch something and then report on it or review it immediately. I know a lot of people on YouTube do this really, really well, very skillful, very clever in terms of their editing and upload timing, etc. But for me, my own personal approach, I could never do that. I could never do that and feel comfortable with a particular video that I upload because I feel like I need time for a particular work to soak in, to let it sink in and let it get absorbed, and so I can feel comfortable talking about it. And so if I try to watch films continuously in order to try to maintain a certain YouTube schedule, I don't think I'd be able to be very happy in my own YouTube channel. I think I would be very sad. In fact, I wouldn't feel happy at all. And that's my own personal journey. I'm not speaking for anyone else. Everyone else who does their own YouTube thing does it in his or her own way, which is fantastic. But for me, I think I would not feel happy and satisfied doing it that way. So I focus in on the other way, which is just focus in on the work. And if some people want to join in, great. If not, that's fine too. Again, it's a free country, or it's you can do whatever it is you want. You can watch whatever you want, and I strongly believe that. And so, it's the videos will still be up, for years and years, hopefully, unless they're taken down, I suppose. But I don't see any issue with them as far as that is concerned. So they'll still be up here in this channel, and so you can always come back to them. I still get comments for videos that I did years back, and so I'm very, very grateful for that. And so that is all to say that even if something that I feel might not necessarily have, let's say, a presence, a trend at the moment, I'm trusting enough, let me put it that way, that maybe it might be something that might be seen later. And even if it's not, then I feel okay with it, because I feel like I've been able, at least at that point in time, to work out something of my own approach to that particular film in real time in that video, which is then uploaded. So that is my long way of saying that. What did you ask here anyway? Do you feel obligated to watch films continuously now that you have an active YouTube channel? So the answer is no, and I'm very grateful for that feeling of not being obligated. But at the same time, I am also trying my very best to cater to the concerns and the wishes of viewers. I can't do it all the time, but I'm doing my very best. And so, and that's one thing I do want to ask. Every time I talk about a film, I know that maybe some people might be disappointed and say, why aren't you talking about this film, or why aren't you talking about that film? And I completely understand. It's just a matter of, how should I put it? It's a matter of kind of economy or economics more than anything else. And economics is essentially the study of limited finite resources and how we use them, whether that be money, resources, the marketplace, etc. And so economics essentially governs how I am able to do all the YouTube videos that I'm able to do. That means to say that if I focus my time on one particular film, that means there are 10,000 films that I haven't been able to focus on. So just because I focus in on one film doesn't necessarily mean that I have no respect for anything else that I haven't focused in on. But it's just that particular moment that I find myself in, just I feel like I should focus in on that one film at that time. So if you feel like I should be focusing in on something else rather than this video, again, all I ask is just for your understanding, and I apologize deeply. It's never my intent to try to ignore other parts of cinema. It's just that by virtue of focusing in on one thing, I am inherently ignoring 10,000, maybe more other things. And so I never mean to do that, but that's just one of the issues that is just inevitable. And so I am doing my very best to cover as many things as I can, given my own limited resources, limited time, limited knowledge, but I am doing my very best. So I apologize if you feel that way at any time, but also I ask for your understanding in that I do understand certain things that do come up, and I am trying to fix them to the best of my ability. I really, really am. And the same also goes for film club live streams as well. You know, I'm very flattered by the attention given to the film club live streams. I really am. I do want to say though that it does take a certain bit of energy on my part to do them, and I love doing them, but every time I finish one, I am very, very tired, and I think it's maybe due to my age. I'm not getting any younger, and also it's just I'm trying to engage as much as possible, and it's not just that the time up to that I've been trying to spend thinking about the film, so it does take a lot of effort. So even if there is a film club live stream film that maybe you might not necessarily be into, again, I apologize, but please know that I always try to I hope I'm not bragging. If it sounds like I'm bragging, I really apologize. But I really, really want to make this clear that every film choice that I make, whether it's a film club live stream or video, I really try to put a lot of thought into it. Really, really I do. And it's at the expense of other films, I know, which is something I really, really hate about myself. But it is still something that I care very much about. And so if you feel like I am ignoring other parts of cinema, you are right, because that's just the inevitable, unavoidable part of this thing that we do, which is YouTube, and also because I don't have unlimited time, unfortunately. But I am doing the very best with what I have, and so so I'm always open to suggestions. I'm always open to recommendations. I'm always open to ideas, as always, my friends, as always, because you help me to go in the right directions in many a case, many a case, I should say. But I always ask also for your understanding, because, as I say, I can only do so much in a given amount of time, but I will do my very best, because I think so far it's been giving me a lot of joy and a lot of fulfillment and a lot of excitement, and also the opportunity to meet all these people, such as yourself, my friends. So again, I ask for your understanding and patience and support and friendship as always. And even if I disappoint, and I know I have for a number of people, I know I've disappointed, I apologize. That was never my intent. But if that has happened, and I know it has happened, please forgive me, and I hope we can still be friends. And because at the end of the day, I think that's the most important thing. And even if not, my friends, still I hope for nothing but the best for everyone here. Be strong, be safe, be healthy, and be well. That is the most important thing. Life's too short for me to worry too much about trying to please everyone. But at the same time, I want to just ask for your understanding to the extent that it is possible with respect to the choices that I make in terms of this YouTube channel. So I hope that's clear. Again, I haven't had too many issues with that sort of thing, so I've been very fortunate in that respect. But just in case anyone feels that way, because I know that if I were a viewer of a channel, I too might feel in a similar way, and so I'm trying to base it off of my own experience as a viewer. So Anyway, sorry for this whole long-winded response, but I hope you can forgive me. And let me just end it there, and I will continue with these Q&A videos going forward. And if I've said anything that might be offensive to you or anything like that, I apologize. That was not my intent at all. But if there is anything, you can always talk to me, and I'm very, very happy to listen. And I'll try to answer anything to the best of my ability. But until then, my friends, until the next Q&A, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Sorry for the long-winded responses, but I hope you can understand. I will see you soon, and cheers.